the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Human Rights into Compulsory Income Management. I begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. I'm Josh Burns, the Chair of the Committee, and I have with me remotely Senator Darmanin, I believe Senator Shoebridge, although I can't see him online yet, Senator Rennick, I can't see him yet. I can see Mr Graham Perrott. I can't see Ms Carly Tink, but I'm reliably informed that they may join at a later date. In the room you have the Deputy Chair, Henry Pike, and Senator O'Sullivan as well. Did I miss anyone remotely or anyone who zoomed in that is not on the screen? No. On behalf of the committee, I welcome you all here today. These are public proceedings being video streamed live by the Parliament's website, and a Hansard transcript is being made. I remind all witnesses that in giving evidence to the committee that they are protected by parliamentary privilege, it is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such action may be treated by the Parliament as a contempt. It is also a contempt to give false or misleading evidence. Witnesses also have a right to request to be heard in camera. I now welcome representatives from the Department of Social Services. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. I remind members and senators that the Senate, the rules of which this joint committee is bound by, has resolved that an officer of a department of the Commonwealth or of a state shall not be asked to give opinions on matters of policy and shall be given reasonable opportunity to refer questions asked of the officer to superior officers or to a minister. This resolution does not preclude questions asking for explanations of policies or factual questions about when and how policies were adopted. If a witness objects to answering a question, they should state the ground on which the objection is made, and the committee will determine whether it will insist on an answer, having regard to the ground which is claimed. If the committee determines to insist on an answer, a witness may request the answer be given in camera. Officers of the department are also reminded that any claim would be contrary to public interest to answer a question. Any claim that it would be contrary to public interest to answer a question must be made by a minister and should be accompanied by a statement setting out the basis for the claim. Now, for the Hansard record, would you please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear today before the committee?
Thank you, Chair. Letitia Hope, Deputy Secretary, Families and Communities, Department of Social Services.
Thanks, Chair. Patrick Burford, Group Manager of Communities Group in the Department of Social Services.
And Patrick Bonham, Branch Manager of Income Management Policy and Data Branch, Department of Social Services.
Thank you very much. Welcome. I'm just getting advice that there is a photographer in the room, so is the committee comfortable agreeing to allowing media into the room? I can't see Deputy Chair.
That, Chair. I think it's Ozpic. It's Ozpic.
Ozpic? Yeah, that seems fine by me. Excuse me, all those in favour, against, carried. All right, we can allow Ozpic into the room. All right, I'll now ask the department to make any opening statements, and then at the conclusion of those remarks, I'll invite members of the committee to ask questions.
Thanks very much, Chair. Jinjawal, everyone. Before I start, can I too acknowledge that wherever you are today, you're on traditional lands of First Nations people, and we pay our respects to First Nations senators, members of Parliament, and all First Nations people here in the room, online or listening to the hearing today. We pay our respects to Elders past, present and emerging for their continuing custodianship of our country, knowledge and culture. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee today. Since the last hearing on the 5th of July 2024, I'd like to inform you that the University of Adelaide review on the impact of the cessation of the cashless debit card final report has been publicly released on the Department of Social Services website on the 19th of July 2024. The findings from the final report will form part of the Department of Social Services consultation on the future of income management. As mentioned on the 5th of July, the department is undertaking the most comprehensive engagement with community undertaken on income management to date. As at 24 June 2024, we have consulted with 72 communities across the Northern Territory, APY lands, South Australia, East Kimberley region, Western Australia and Shepparton in Victoria. Just under 4,000 community members have participated in these consultations. Since December 2022, we have consulted with over 200 community organisations, Commonwealth, state and territory government and peak bodies. As requested by the communities, we will continue these consultations over the coming months on the next steps to deliver on the government's commitment to make income management voluntary. This will include consultations on the process to support people to transition off the program and the process for people to stay. We're happy to answer the questions from the committee today, and thank you for having us here. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much. I'm happy to see the first round of questions. I've got some, but I'm going to go to my colleagues. So, Deputy Chair, do you want to start?
Thank you, Chair.
Let's get a copy of that.
Would we be able to get a copy of that opening statement?
Yes, sure.
Thank you. And
There is one typo in it, which I have corrected, just so you know, in full disclosure.
I wrote most of those.
Yes, happy to get that for you right now.
Thank you. And given Chair, that we're going to be discussing the review of the impact of the cessation of the cashless debit card final report, can I table that as well, just so we've got that? And I don't know if it's acceptable to you, Chair, if we publish that as an additional document to the inquiry, just for completeness.
I don't know what the requirements are if you table it, Deputy Chair. Charlotte, do you have any advice?
It's just by committee agreement to table it, apparently, Chair. If that's
Well, is it if it's a public document already, I'm happy to table it.
It's the document that was just referred to by.
Yeah, I know what document it's. It has been released already by Freedom of Information, hasn't it?
It's also publicly
But
available.
it's been published on the department's website.
well,
we just want to incorporate it within this inquiry.
Fine, that's
Thank
fine.
you, Chair. Ms Hope, at the hearing on the 5th of July, you stated that the department had received the final report on the 31st of May, but had not provided it to the Minister until the 3rd of July. Why was there such a delay?
Thank you for your question. As I think I gave testimony on the 5th of July, the department had received the report and at that point in time was working its way through the report to be able to provide a fulsome briefing to the Minister.
Mm-hmm. Was the timing of the report's release at 10 p.m. on the evening when we had the last hearing designed to avoid the scrutiny of our committee's inquiry?
No.
No?
The timing of the releasing of the report was within the statutes of FOI.
Mm-hmm. Was it released on the first day of the parliamentary winter break to avoid parliamentary scrutiny?
No.
Your submission didn't make any reference to the final report or to the report at all. Given that the Parliament has tasked this committee with inquiring into the effectiveness of compulsory income management, why didn't the department make it clear within their submission that this study had been underway for nearly 12 months?
I might give that to Mr Burford. Thank you.
Thanks. We've had repeated testimony at previous Senate estimates hearing about this work underway to do this review, that the review was commissioned and provided updates at previous Senate estimates hearing. If it wasn't part of the submission, that would be an omission in error rather than any design. It's been very clear that this review was underway.
Okay.
I also just wanted to point out the actual publication date on the department's website was about 3:12 p.m. Not 10 p.m. So 10 p.m. might relate to FOI releases, but I suspect the actual release of the publication on the department's website was just after 3 p.m. on the 19th.
Mm.
Sorry, Senator, I missed your question.
Did you say that it was published on the 19th?
That's correct. 19th of July. That's right. At 3:12 p.m.
But the FOI was on the day of the hearing, which was earlier that.
The 5th of July.
Yeah, so that's the 10 p.m.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yep,
the 10 p.m.
right.
is the
relates to the FOI.
Relates to the FOI.
Mm. The reports found that perceived impacts of the CDC cessation was mostly negative and centred around financial management, alcohol and gambling misuse, child wellbeing and welfare, and safety and violence. Is that consistent with the department's view and the outcomes or the ongoing outcomes of your own consultation?
The report found a range of different things. It had a wide range of views, actually. Mm-hmm. I'm happy for Mr Burford to talk to you with the the conversations that we've been having in our community consultations, which again have demonstrated a wide range of views.
I was quoting directly there from page 4 of the report. But is that consistent with the department's view?
Well, the report, what's consistent is the observation that there's multiple causes and it's hard to actually assign any one policy to any of the observations being made. That's been made at several points throughout the report. I'd say that observation is consistent with all our engagements since the cessation of the card, our engagements with community, which we've had about 363 engagements across the 4 regional sites since the cessation of the CDC. There are observations of a range of things in terms of social harms. Some of it was, there were suggestions from stakeholders that was attributable to the cessation of the cards, but also acknowledged by other stakeholders and participants that there were multiple things at play, and that's been acknowledged. So in terms of consistencies in the broad findings about observations and the difficulty in causality, that's been quite consistent with what we've seen in our engagement with stakeholders.
Would you accept what the report found, which was that a majority of stakeholders were disappointed that the program was ended, as they considered it to have generated positive impacts and were concerned about the increased social issues being experienced since the program ceased?
I would accept that that's the perception of stakeholders, but also that the majority of actual participants have reflected through this report and our stakeholder engagement that they are happy to be off the card.
Mm-hmm. Would you accept that since compulsory income management has ended, former participants are spending more of their money on alcohol and gambling products?
We did not see any conclusive evidence of that.
Okay. That was a key finding within the report. I thought it was interesting in the review that it was actually the past participants themselves that were more likely than the stakeholders to highlight gambling as being an issue post-CDC. A Goldfields participant noted that past CDC participants have all gone back to how they used to be before the injury came in. They're hammering it every time they get paid, to the point where some of them don't get left with any money because they've got full access to all the cash now. So they've got big gambling problems. How's the department monitoring the level of gambling within these communities?
We monitor all impacts through our regular engagement with communities. As I mentioned, we've had close to 400 engagements and continue. I was in East Kimberley in the last fortnight, and we have staff out at the moment in the Goldfields region. So it's a regular relationship type engagement in terms of monitoring. It's difficult to monitor precise data. The gambling takes many forms in communities before and afterwards, and in communities that aren't subject to income management of any form. We'd certainly heard that anecdotally. We've also heard anecdotally that when the cashless debit card was in play, card games were still able to be played with the actual physical cards being used as the actual wages. And so there is a wide range of views, as Ms Hope mentioned, in terms of the perceived harms before, during and after. And so we monitor those in terms of our engagement with community. Okay. Look, for example, and online, this is very unrelated to the card in respects, but in my recent visit to Cowan in far north Queensland, online illegal offshore gambling, pokies have become quite rife in the community, according to community anecdote. And when I visit them to talk about the future of income management, they've asked me to investigate that with relevant authorities about how to stop those illegal operators. So there are real issues regarding gambling in a lot of communities. Some of it are related to income management sites, others are more broader.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also important to read those comments in relation to gambling in the context of... so the reference here is some respondents in Ceduna and East Kimberley. Mm-hmm. So on page 14 there's an explanation of what most, many, few, some means. Mm-hmm. And some is a minority of respondents. Mm. So it's a sizable minority, but it's a minority of respondents have noticed gambling had increased.
Mm. Yes, of course. Well, we are the Human Rights Committee, and we are interested in the human rights of all, not just the majority. The review outlines that concerns were raised in Ceduna, East Kimberley and the Goldfields of declining levels of child wellbeing and welfare following the CDC program cessation. The report says some children not being fed or clothed properly, not attending school, or being out in the streets unsupervised at night, including with groups of intoxicated adults. One East Kimberley participant noted that you see people have drinks every day, they've got no money for food and the kids start going hungry here. How's the department monitoring the safety and well-being of children within these communities?
In terms of food security and the like, part of our, in our stream and my group looks after emergency relief, food relief as well. We monitor quite closely the demand on food relief in all the communities, not just cashless debit card sites or former sites, and we monitor whether there's surge demands for food in a range of areas. And it's not. We've heard observations of increased demand for food related to cost of living pressures across the country, not just in cashless debit card, but we do keep a close eye on monitoring that. We provide advice to the Minister about whether there's surge effort needed in those particular communities. Part of the support services funding that also came with this package, around 174 million over the 4 years have been identified, funds a range of services in communities, and there's a fair bit of flexibility and agency given to key organisations and leaders in remote communities to decide where those priorities are. In East Kimberley, a part of that also included providing additional support for food relief to help complement existing effort. So we do monitor through a range of providers and also our engagement with communities.
I think, sorry, the only other thing I would add there is that the department is actively in these communities consistently, all the time. We have staff out with these communities, talking to community providers and community members constantly, and happy certainly to provide a very comprehensive dossier of all the places that we've been. In fact, we've got staff out there right now. And so I take your point around the issue, but we aren't, this is not a set and forget interaction with the department in communities, not only about what the forward plan is for income management, but how this is happening in communities right now. And when I say the department, I mean everyone from the secretary through to local staff who we have in state. So we are out and about talking to communities, looking at what need is, being very responsive in terms of working with community organisations around their local service plans, etc. But in the same breath, I would welcome any feedback that people are receiving so that we can take that into account.
Good. Well, I'll just on that topic. So, for instance, in the report, Ceduna participant number 3 mentioned the circumstances of a young boy to the review team. They said, and I'll quote, "That little boy's father got a pay yesterday and he spent it all on drink, and the little boy came over to my place and asked me for an orange. I said, I've got no orange, baby, because I got no money to buy orange. That's made me sad. You know, little boy crying, he was hungry, didn't have anything to eat. The father got drunk and spent all this money on drink, even the mother too. They don't think about saving money for the baby." Has the department taken any action to identify that child and to get that child the support that they need?
No, we haven't had a specific request or specifically, because again it's data that came through as part of a review rather than an immediate crisis response. We can certainly follow up, but it'll be quite difficult. We could work through this University of Adelaide to see if they could identify the individual. Again, well, that is a quoted.
It's not public. I mean, you could inquire of the University of Adelaide. They would know who that participant is.
Yeah, certainly we could. We also, I mean, again, we have people in the Ceduna region, or we had them on Thursday and Friday as well, liaising with stakeholders about the needs of community. And not just responding to a crisis situation, but also economic opportunities they want to explore with us in future investments. So not through our regular feed of information we've had it, but we certainly could make an inquiry into that. I didn't mean to dismiss that as a matter. It was certainly something we could follow up, but I suspect there's other means by which we'd hear those anecdotes as well, because we have other anecdotes about people feeling a greater level of agency and ability to actually have greater freedoms with greater cash in pocket. They can go online and go through Marketplace to buy second-hand goods where they may not be able to do that when their cash is restricted. So there is a mixed range of views we're hearing, not just the ones you've just
well, what concerns me is you've had this report since May. This was one of several individual cases that was stated. You've mentioned about how you've got departmental staff continuously engaging within these communities. These aren't the biggest communities in the world. I would have thought it'd be a fairly straightforward process to identify who this boy is and for the department to try to provide or try to do something, or at least alert state authorities that there was support needed there. Do you not? I'm intrigued as to why that action hasn't been taken in all these weeks since.
I would say, all I can say is the action hasn't happened as triggered by this review, where it's picked out anecdotes of experiences. But what I'm saying is that we're monitoring them very closely, and we're invited to be part of state-based regular meetings on a range of social matters, and we hear reports through that matter. And again, the responding organisations, some of whom are funded by us, some of which are state government, we're keeping a close eye on. But regarding that anecdote, certainly we could have a look into that particular case.
Or Sejuna participant number 1 gave an example of a man, and I'll quote, he only ever got $220 a fortnight in cash. Well, now you're giving him $900, so he's drinking $900 a fortnight, so you're killing him. His eyes are yellow, he's not taking his medication, he's walking around, he's just drinking until he passes out. I assume the department hasn't taken any action on that front either to identify this gentleman.
Not specifically as a result of that anecdote that you've read, but certainly we would have had regular engagements about people that the South Australian government and service providers would be monitoring in a regular basis.
Can I recommend that the department look through this review, find those cameos, those examples that have been given by participants who are saying, participants and stakeholders who are saying that people are in dire need. I mean, this man sounds like he's really down and out and having, I'd be concerned that this man is in desperate need of hospitalisation and to take the required action to ensure they get the support that they need.
We can certainly follow up on those particular cases. I don't think there's a great deal of efficacy in a review into a program cessation that will pick out survey respondents to determine the precise nature of emergent need for an individual. I think that's worth us continuing our regular engagement with state and territories and our local providers as well to respond, because as opposed to what Uni of Adelaide's been asked to do, these services are talking about the entire population, not just a sample that was surveyed for a report. So it's really important that we're keeping a pretty thorough eye, and by we, I'm talking the states and territories and our service provider partners, on the actual outcomes for individuals. And also being very clear, there's very little evidence to actually point any causality to the card, but largely that's a little bit an aside matter. We continue to engage deeply about what's happening in the community, what are their needs and what are their future aspirations, irrespective of whether there's a causal link or not to the card, its introduction or its removal. But we'll certainly have a look at those particular cases you've mentioned.
The Minister's had this report since the 3rd of July. It's been nearly a month. Has the Minister's office or the Minister asked the department to try and identify these people to try and understand what's happening?
Not to my knowledge.
Deputy Chair, just because we've got Senator Shoebridge as well as joined on, I think we should try and sort of pick different members a chance to ask questions. So maybe if I sort of give you the last couple of minutes and then we'll throw to someone else and then we can always come back to you after.
Yeah, absolutely, Chair. I might just move on to the transition. The report noted that stakeholders uniformly expressed dissatisfaction with the level of community consultation that had occurred between the federal government and local organisations regarding the ending of the CDC program in the 4 regions. Would you acknowledge that this was handled poorly?
I'd be able to share a fair bit of detail about the level of engagement at the ministerial level and also the departmental level about the engagement with the community prior to, during and post the cessation of the card. There's quite a bit of detail, so I'm not sure if that will be the best use of time now to step through. So I do believe there was authentic and detailed efforts to consult with communities and affected participants. In the CDC regions, we work closely with our colleagues in Services Australia about our engagement methodologies and our communication methodology about the cessation of the card, including translation into Indigenous language, including having regular staff on the ground in the lead up to, so everyone have decent information about what this means. We funded local support partners, which are locally employed people that can be the liaison between the community members and Services Australia. So we had governance arrangements to monitor that effort and to pivot where we needed to, where our communications weren't effective. For example, we implemented an outbound call strategy when the numbers of people exiting the program were starting to plateau, because we had the task of getting around 12,500 people off the card in that period. So I would not agree that it wasn't a effective communication approach. It was a truncated time, but we across the ministerial and the departmental level, we can share a bit more detail of that engagement. I'm not sure if that's probably.
A Ceduna stakeholder noted that there was a really good transition plan that was co-designed with the department, but it was a shame that they being the federal government, didn't follow up, and that it was truncated due to the deadlines that were passed by the Parliament. Would you acknowledge that the process, you've mentioned the strength of the plan, would you say that the plan's implementation and the process of transition was rushed to meet a political deadline?
I'll acknowledge it was a pretty short time frame, but I think I acknowledge that we consulted well, we had a plan, we adjusted that plan with feedback from stakeholders. We did local investments that allowed for rapid deployment of resources locally to help with transition as well. And we'll be conducting, I can talk about this later if questioned, but we are conducting a review of those supports to look at their effectiveness. So I think it would be important to gather that information about those support systems to really get a sense about the adequacy of those. The planning process, we developed local support plans in each of the 4 former CDC regions. That involved detailed consultations. Not all stakeholders were able to respond and participate, and we have heard from some that were unhappy they weren't able to participate, but again, we had a decent representation of many stakeholders, service providers, state governments in what are the priorities for communities that informed local support plans. So, yeah, that's probably the extent
Thank you, Mr. Burford. Chair, do you want to go around the grounds and then...
Yeah, we'll come back to you. Yeah. Also, just before I throw to Senator Darman, I will just also remind the department and also all members that certainly we can ask the departmental officials about information about timelines and information about evidence and the different components of policy, but it puts the department into difficult positions if we start asking them about their opinions of various matters. And I'll just remind all members that that's not an appropriate line of questioning, and the department needs to be mindful of what they can and can't respond with. I'm going to hand over to Senator Darman.
Thank you. So the committee's work here is to look at compulsory income management and the impact on human rights. And I think in terms of the context of this report, it's important to remember that. I wonder if the department could just confirm that the report there is no causal link to the abolition of the cashless debit card. Is that correct?
That's correct, Senator. The report does not make a causal link to the abolishment of the cashless debit card.
And is there any other commentary around that you would add in terms of the preparation of the report or the guidelines that were provided from the department?
Sure, Senator. I think when I gave testimony last time in this committee, I talked about the fact that the report is a review, it is not an evaluation. It's actually really important to understand that. There have been evaluations that have been conducted in the past, and we can certainly talk about those. It was a review around the transition, and it is a review that reflects the views of stakeholders and participants during that transition. And so, as we have maintained, it has a very wide cross-section of perspectives, and we do think that is important. But it has got a very wide cross-section of perspectives from various different people, some of them negative, as Mr Pike has pointed out, some of them positive, as Mr Burford has pointed out. So I think that is important. I think the causation, there are a range of different factors that are happening across communities all across the country, and I think it's not meant to reflect causation at all. It is literally a review of the transition and how people experienced that. Important piece of information or series of information, but yes, it is not a causational report.
Thank you. And you did just refer to the views of participants who are subject to compulsory income management in these communities, which I think Mr Burford did refer to earlier, and I think he commented that they were generally positive. Is there any further kind of information you can provide to the committee on that?
Yeah, we can talk through various different anecdotes that participants have provided in relation to their views on the positive. Did you want to talk through that, Harry?
I might ask Mr Bonham to help out a little bit with that.
So the report itself is reporting, and the quotes are findings from the interviews with stakeholders and participants. In some cases, and I'll refer to previous evidence, there are views which are, some people have stated, which people have stated more than others, but generally there is some references to views of people who may have a differing approach or opinion to the other views. So, one of these ones is in relation to criminal activity increasing. There are statements in the report.
I'm particularly interested in the participants.
Participants, yeah, I think one of the participants have said that that crimes had increased, but the findings of actual WA crime from Western Australia Police is that there was a marginal or moderate change.
But
in relation to the comments from individuals or participants, the majority of participants were glad that the program had ceased. Some of that was in relation to their agency. A lot of that was in relation to belief that they didn't need to be on the program, as they did not either had problems with drinking, financial management or gambling, and the stigma which was associated with the card was also stated as a reason why they'd like to have come off the program.
Sorry, just building on that, there were some really practical anecdotes received from participants, particularly around some of the issues that Mr Burford was talking to earlier. And I can quote one from page 47, which says, "So I can buy second-hand goods and go back to having a normal life. Having just to buy everything brand new, we really can't afford it. So financially, I've gained it from now. Second-hand things, which I can do on the pension. You don't have to have money to go out and buy new beds and new... So in terms of some of those cost of living things, people found that the flexibility of being able to have more money means that they could engage in marketplace and other forms of being able to purchase second-hand goods without those kinds of limitations. So they felt that was incredibly liberating in lots of ways. And that's consistent across the sites, not just in one site. Sorry, Senator.
Yeah, I was just going to add a couple more observations. Again, noting that it actually addresses some of the stigma that's associated with the card and assume helplessness and assume that it needs other people, folk need other people to manage their money for them. So they felt that, I was just trying to think of one of the quotes, kind of relief for some families that do just perfectly fine without the structure that the CDC had. They adapted to the new structure, can actually manage their own life, their own finances, and they're good. They don't need someone controlling their finances. So it goes to that point of Mr Bonham and Ms Hope about the notion of agency. And look, that's largely consistent with even what we're finding in our consultation, that some people might see a value for an income management, but certainly doesn't see that being a decision of a third party.
Thank you. I think there was a reference before to the policing outcomes in Western Australia as well, and I just quickly scrambled to that part of the report. And I think what you were referring to said I think you said a marginal slight increase, but actually the report says an analysis of the data suggests a little substantial change had occurred in policing outcomes for either East Kimberley or Goldfields trial sites. I think that's what you were referring to just before?
Yes.
Yeah. You may have kind of covered this off already, but did participants have any specific views in relation to human rights and compulsory income management that you could pick out that you haven't already spoken about?
Look, I think only what we've just mentioned there, Senator, regarding the stigma and the sense of agency, that the financial management and the responsibilities is a matter for those families and be trusted to, like all of us, to be able to manage their monies. I think that's the main, without being explicit referencing to the declarations and obligations. I think that would be the closest link from an individual stakeholder.
So, Senator, can I just add, because I apologise, I thought you were talking about reference to the report. In the consultations that we've done, that I've referred to multiple times in this committee, a range of participants, again, a range of different views. The overwhelming view that we hear on the ground across all the sites is people want choice. They want choice. Yep, they want to be able to have agency to manage their money. They want choice to be able to have access to good financial management tools, as does everyone else in this, and I think I gave quite a lot of testimony on that in our last hearing. People want choice to be able to manage their finances, and we need to provide supports in that to help people to do that, which we are currently doing through many of the local support services and continue to do. But I think rather than the actual University of Adelaide report in terms of human rights, what we are hearing from those consultations, that message around choice is actually very clear. And we are also hearing very mixed views from community about keeping the card or taking the card away. So there is no one majority view here. It is a very mixed set of views that we're hearing through our consultation processes to date. But as I said, the overwhelming consistent thing that we hear is choice.
Thank you. I'll leave my questions there, Chair.
Thank you. Senator Shoebridge, did you want to ask any questions?
Yeah, I did. Thanks, Chair, and thanks to the department for attending today. When the report says that most stakeholders strongly supported the ending of the cashless debit card, did you get any breakdown from the review authors about what the kind of proportions were?
Thanks, Senator Shoebridge. I might hand to Mr Bonham to give you some of the definitions around what most, some and the majority actually mean. I can give a second for.
Yeah. Thank you, Senator. They didn't give us actual numbers that I'm aware of. So if you wanted proportions, etc., we don't have that. But they use the term most and many, which is majority of respondents, and respondents mean both stakeholders and participants. And the term some is a sizeable minority of respondents, and few, several is a small minority of respondents.
Okay. So they have their ordinary usage, have the meaning in ordinary usage.
Yep.
But you didn't seek any breakdown of when it says most CDC participants welcomed the ending, the removal of stigmatisation and the obtaining of agency. You can't help us other than say it's the majority.
We don't have that. We would need to seek that from the university and see if they actually have that or not.
Right.
So,
well, can I ask that you...
We can take that on notice for you, Senator.
Some granular data about what the actual people who are on the cashless debit card said about it? I mean, I would have thought as a Human Rights Committee, understanding what the people who were subject to this particular government policy thought about it would be particularly useful. So if we could, that would be great. The anecdotal reports suggest in some places an increase in gambling when the cashless debit card was removed. Did the implementation of the cashless debit card come with any actual services to reduce dependency on gambling? Or did it come with any policy efforts that you're aware of from the federal government to reduce the insidious availability of gambling in these communities? Was there any of that done?
Sorry, Senator, can I clarify? Do you mean with the introduction of the cashless debit card or the removal? I'm sorry.
At any time. I mean, at any time during the operation of the cashless debit card, did the Commonwealth Government provide any services to assist people to deal with any potential gambling addiction, or was it just simply done by taking their cash?
All communities would have been beneficiary of, I guess, a lot of other program efforts regarding problem gambling. We fund problem gambling financial counselling. We found financial counselling services, and again,
none of that. They're generic services.
Sure.
I'm asking about if there was anything targeted to people who had been placed on the CDC. Apart from generic services.
No, look, there was some very targeted in those communities, in the Forsyths and also in the Northern Territory and Cape York, some financial wellbeing supports, and that would have included appropriate ability to make referrals. And yes, those generic ones are part of the funded platform, but there are some dedicated ones. And
the answer is, the shorter answer is just no, isn't it?
No, the short answer is yes, with regard to some direct financial wellbeing supports that would include appropriate referrals of someone presented with some problem gambling issues.
So referrals at best, some reference to referrals to existing services.
Certainly.
That's the highest you can point it to?
Yep.
That's like on a brochure, is it?
I beg your pardon?
Was that on a brochure? The referral? Was it on a brochure? Was it on a website? I mean, how did people find out about the existence of pre-existing gambling support?
Oh, that would be through either a case management or a interface with a financial counsellor or a financial wellbeing officer at the point of at each community and each regional area. So I could.
So they might have been told about it.
If they presented it, that's correct. Yeah.
They might have been told about a pre-existing service.
Yes.
That's it. And then when CDC is removed, some of the concerns is that without any resources addressed to dealing with the insidious nature of the gambling industry and people's potential to gamble, some of that returned. That's what's happened. That's what this report suggests, isn't it? In some of the communities, once the CDC was removed, some people, it appears anecdotally, returned to gambling. Is that what the report says?
There are anecdotal observations of that, Senator. I'm not sure if you were here for my early testimony that...
I was.
Well, during the card, there was also ways and means around the actual card and restrictions. And I guess since the cessation of June this year, there's been a ban on any form of credit card being used for gambling products as well. And so, with or without a card, a Visa card cannot be used to purchase any gambling products. Noting that that relates to online gambling and also land-based gambling, it doesn't cover the full gamut of what might be card games and other offshore activity.
And that process we just went through about finding out what, if any, additional supports or services were available to deal with problem gambling, just assume that we're going through that entire process and instead I'm now saying alcohol and or drug abuse. Were there any additional supports and services provided for people on CDC for alcohol and drug addiction?
I'd have to confirm exactly again, it's quite often in a generic sense. There is funding that's being deployed. The grants are out at the moment with regard to AOD services. That's managed through the Department of Health.
The grants out at the moment won't relate to the cashless debit card, which was abolished in 2022. I'm asking about during the currency of the cashless debit card. And it would just be quicker. We had that process we went through about gambling. I was trying to make it quicker this time about doing it for alcohol. So perhaps we could just cut to the chase.
Sure. I'll have to take that on notice. That might be the most effective way to get to the response, because you're talking about during the cashless debit card. The supports I'm talking about were the funding committed to support the transition away from the cashless debit card. So there's a scope.
Are you sitting there now? Are you aware of any additional supports or services that were provided to people who were placed on the cashless debit, the CDC? Any additional and targeted supports or services to deal with alcohol and or drug addictions?
Not that I'm aware of, but I will confirm on notice, Senator.
How did the department run a program for 13 years? I'll change that. How did the department run a program for over a decade, allegedly dealing with gambling and alcohol and drug addictions, and not provide those services to the people who are the subject of the program? How did you run a program for over a decade that's allegedly dealing with that problematic behaviour and not provide those supports and services to the people who are the subject of the program? How did that happen?
Are you asking with regard to the cashless debit card or the removal?
No. The removal didn't happen over a decade, did it? I'll ask a question again.
Sure.
How did your department run the cashless debit card program for over a decade, allegedly to deal with concerns about problematic alcohol and drug use and problematic gambling, and at no point in that decade or so provide fresh or targeted services to the people of the cashless debit, the subject of the cashless debit card, to address problematic gambling, alcohol or drug services? How did that happen?
Because you're talking about services of when the program was running from 2016 onwards, I'd have to take on notice, look at the type of services. There are a range of community consultative fora that was used when the CDC was introduced progressively in multiple sites. And there were a range of smaller support services, I think in the order of around $14 million per annum, that were provided to support the deployment of the cashless debit card. And I'd have to take on notice exactly the precise nature. They're quite a broad church of services, not just targeted on alcohol or targeted on gambling. It could be things like a youth program that will provide activities for young people, or a bus program to help transport people back to community or into main centres to get support.
Yeah, but my question was about gambling an alcohol and drug, and not about bus rides.
But we don't have a bus ride called the gambling bus. There's a bus into services to help someone access a range of services. So
that are pre-existing.
Beg your pardon?
So I'm not really talking about bus rides to pre-existing services, and you know that because we had that exchange earlier. I'm talking about fresh services aimed to deal with people's gambling problems or their alcohol and drug problems. So if you are going to take the question on notice, if you could address that.
We certainly can, and I'll clarify that we're talking about services that were put in place to support the operation of the cashless debit card, which again is, I'll have to find out.
To provide support for people who are placed on the cashless debit card to deal with alcohol or drug dependency and or gambling.
Correct. And then you would also like then, post the cessation of the card, the new supports that were brought in place doing similar.
That's a suggestion that you've put on the table, and I'm happy for you to address that as well.
Okay. Yeah. No, it was just a clarity,
We just wanted
Senator.
to be clear, Senator, what helpful. It is you were asking.
No, that's okay. After the last hearing, there was some data provided about income management exemptions. Do you remember providing those answers?
Yes, Senator. We do have the officer here with that information.
Now, someone in my team has put it in a graph dealing with the data going from 2011 through to this year. Did you have a look at the data, and did you notice the structural disparity for exemptions that were granted to First Nations peoples as opposed to non-First Nations peoples? Did you look at that disparity?
Yeah, so at the last hearings, we mentioned that Indigenous or First Nations applicants number of applications is significantly less than their actual percentage of. So, for example, there's over 80% of Indigenous First Nations people on the programs, but in most cases, only around 40 to 50% of applications are from First Nations people.
So there's that structural disadvantage insofar as less applications for exemption pro rata have come from First Nations peoples. And did you have an explanation for that? Was it a...
No, we don't know why that's the case.
Did you think maybe you should explore that? Maybe work out how you could help First Nations people seek the exemption so there's some kind of at least starting point parity? That was never explored?
We would need to take that on notice because Services Australia is responsible for the exemption process, so we need to ask what they actually do in relation to promotion of the exemption process.
Can you think of any explanation apart from systemic discrimination, any other explanation for why First Nations peoples have not accessed the exemption at anything like the rate of non-First Nations peoples? Have you got any other working hypothesis?
I wouldn't suggest that Services Australia is...
I'm not sure it's right for us to speculate either, Senator, to be honest. But certainly...
Well, can you explain why?
Well, no, Senator.
Because you can't, you haven't looked at it.
So we're happy to take that on notice, Senator, and work with Services Australia who does that work. What I can say on behalf of Services Australia is I know that they do a lot of work within First Nations community. I know that they have a strong First Nations or Indigenous service officer network that they lean into within these spaces. I know that they are working very closely with First Nations communities in terms of a whole range of measures on closing the gap. The department and the Services Australia senior officials have had conversations about how do we enhance that to make sure that First Nations people are actually receiving services they should, particularly in remote areas, but not specifically. But we are happy to take that on notice, Senator.
Did you look at the other data you provided about the proportion of exemptions granted and the disparity between the success rate for exemptions for First Nations peoples as opposed to non-First Nations peoples? Did you look at that data?
We have.
And if so, were you shocked by it? Were you shocked by it, or is that what you expected?
Well, we have provided the
Do you
data.
expect this data? But is this what you expected? Did you expect it to have an almost 2-to-1 disparity for most of the operation of income management against First Nations peoples? Did you expect that kind of systemic discrimination to show in the data?
Well, the data itself and the data which we've provided you is a number of exemptions granted and exemptions sought. From what you're saying, there is a disparity between those two.
It's not what I'm saying, it's what the data shows. Did you look at that?
Well, I have done some analysis myself, and from about...
Well, tell me what your analysis shows in terms of disparity.
Definitely from around 2010, there was a fairly significant disparity. Then from around 2021, that disparity starts to reduce. So, for example, in 2010, there was about an 81% success rate for non-Indigenous and 34% for Indigenous. And in relation to, in 2022, that had narrowed from 96 to 75. And from 2024, that had narrowed again to 98 to 91%.
And in 2024, you have a tiny data pool, don't you?
Yes, very tiny data pool. That's right.
We wouldn't accept as...
Well, it's tiny, but it's the majority of the year.
Last couple of questions, David.
You see, for the entire operation of this scheme, the exemptions, First Nations peoples have been on this data, have been systemically discriminated against, and their applications for exemptions have been denied at a rate that is roughly, at sometimes, 7 times the rate of non-First Nations peoples.
That was
have you,
2020 that has significantly reduced.
Well, was that because Services Australia and your department realised there was systemic discrimination that needed to be addressed? Why did that happen?
We haven't necessarily got the detail about why that disparity exists, and I think we've committed to find out a bit more about the reasons why those applications for exemptions weren't successful. I don't think we could draw conclusions about structural issues without understanding a bit more of those reasons.
Well, you see, on the reading, on all the data you've provided, on the proportion of First Nations peoples who feel empowered enough to be able to challenge their income management and seek an exemption, the data shows quite systemic disparity against First Nations peoples. They feel obviously less able or capable to seek an exemption. And when they do seek an exemption, they're being refused at a rate that at different times, according to this data, is like 6 or 7 times the rate of non-First Nations people.
I think the majority was 81 to 34, so that's probably
so
2.5.
So 66% as opposed to 19%. So you're right, it's 3 and a bit times. Yeah. 3 and a bit times being
and that was the first year of the exemptions.
And for the bulk of this data, rejected at least 2 or 3 times the rate of non-First Nations peoples. You're not trying to defend this data, are you?
No, I'm just saying that was the data is, but it was definitely not 7 times.
If it was my department and I was working in the department and I was seeking to have a non-discriminatory application of income management and I saw this data, I would have sought an explanation before now. And I'm wondering why I haven't sought an explanation before now and why you haven't sought an explanation before now.
So we'd have to take that one on notice because basically a lot of that is going back to 2010. So
I think asking officials as to why they have an opinion of an explanation of data is verging into opinions, Senator.
I'm asking them, Chair, why they haven't sought an explanation for the disparity. And I think that's well within the bounds of standing orders. And the answer is, as I understand it, you're not in a position to answer now, but you'll take it on notice. Is that right?
Well, this exemption started back in 2010, so I can't talk to what previous colleagues may have done in between the period of 2010 up to now.
Yeah, but even when you got this data, as a result of requests from this committee, you still didn't make the inquiry, despite you having looked at it and seen the disturbing systemic discrimination that you identified in the numbers.
But as stated, the concerns which you have raised about 2.5, 3 times has been 14 years ago. The disparity now, sorry, I need to do a calculation.
You're right. It's in the last 4-year data that we have in 2023, 5% of non-First Nations peoples had their exemptions rejected, and 22% of First Nations peoples had their exemptions rejected. It's 4.5 times more likely to have your application rejected in 2023 if you're First Nations than non-First Nations, and that's the best year. That's your best year. 4.5 times more likely to have your application rejected if you're First Nations, and that's your best year.
I'm not quite sure how you're getting that number, Senator.
Well,
the best year so far is 91% to 98%.
I'll tell you how you do the data. In 2023, only 5% of non-First Nations peoples had their application for an exemption rejected.
Yes.
Yet 22% of First Nations peoples had their application for an exemption rejected. You divide 22 by 5 and you come up with about 4.5. 4.5 times more likely to have your application rejected if you're First Nations than you're non-First Nations in the year to which you point with the best 4-year data, the least discriminatory 4-year data.
But that is a different construct than what we were talking about, which was successful applications.
I don't quite know how to respond to that. 4.5 times more likely to have your application rejected if you're First Nations than non-First Nations. You say I should ignore that data?
No, what I'm saying is that from a successful point of view, it's 98 to 91% this year, which is not 4 times worse.
But you're talking about 252 partial year data, less than a quarter of the year-on-year data that you'd expect for a year. I'm talking about the last actual credible data we have for a full year. It's 2023. I don't know why we're having this debate. The data shows for over a decade ongoing and continuing systemic discrimination against First Nations peoples, and you're having an argument with me about whether I should be relying upon partial data for the current year, as opposed to a decade and a half of detailed data which shows the systemic discrimination. I can't believe we're having this argument.
Senator, I don't think anyone's arguing with you, and I don't think the official, Mr Bonham, is trying to debate what you're saying. I think he's trying to clarify what you're saying, which is not quite the same thing as debating what you're saying, with all due respect, Senator.
Well, I don't see how you can cavil with my proposition that in 2023, the last full year for which we have data, First Nations peoples had their applications rejected at more than 4 times the rate of non-First Nations peoples. Do you still cavil with that proposition?
From a point of view of rejection, that is what the data is saying. However, from the point of view of what was successful, it is a basic different number, and it is a different construct.
Can I just jump in there? Can you explain that for me, please? In terms of, are you talking about the overall number of people who have applied that are successful?
Yes. So we are looking. So the numbers which I have is in relation to successful applications, from a proportion of total made to those which were successfully agreed to.
And just for the purposes of Hansard, can you go through those numbers?
So the numbers were, so for example, in 2010, it was 81 to 34, 2011, 79-43, 2012, 85 to 53, 2013, 81 to 35, 2014, 81 to 36, 2015 86 to 46, 2016 86 to 53, 2017 86 53, 8 to 2018 84 to 53, 2019 88 to 61, 2020 94 to 70, 21 96 to 77, 22 96 to 75, 23 I think it was 95, 75, and 24 98 to 91.
And that's non-Indigenous and Indigenous peoples.
Yes. Yep. So the first number was non-Indigenous.
So I think in order to categorise the data in a slightly different way to Senator Shoebridge, not that his reading of it is incorrect. It is just to say that the number of people who have been granted exemptions who are non-Indigenous has been larger year on year, but that number has decreased over time, and that a similar proportion in terms of numbers, especially in the last year or so, of Indigenous and non-Indigenous people have been granted exemptions.
Except for the data show, it doesn't show a similar number.
I would. Yep.
Sorry, Chair. With all due respect, I do take note what the Senator's point is, and we are, as a department, happy to go back to Services Australia, as we said, and investigate the reasons, which I think was the Senator's point, and talk to Services Australia about making sure that there is no systemic issues or systemic structural issues within the program, and that service delivery is being done appropriately, which I think was the Senator's point.
I think that would be beneficial for the committee, and I think that would be useful information to come back to. And I just remind the department that as we're sort of on a tightish time frame, we did have a shortened time for questions on notice, and members were also reminded that we can keep them succinct so that the department can answer the most important ones. And I think this one is an important point. So if we could prioritise this, that would be useful. Senator, I'm going to be a grumpy chair and hand over to the next person. Mr. Perry.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to the department for your evidence. And I want to go further to Senator Shoebridge's question, particularly interested in decisions where compulsory income management was made without that individualised assessment. Is that a decision that where the person could seek to have their circumstances reviewed? This is just sort of winding back a bit.
Mr. Perrott, are you after the policy premise of how that came about? Is that what your question?
Well, in terms of whether it can be reviewed, and I'm interested in the actual process.
Sure.
You know, what would Joe Blow or Mary Smith actually do to have their circumstances considered?
Yeah, we can take this.
This is not at the exemption stage yet.
No, we can take that on notice, but and ask Services Australia. But my understanding is that all review rights are applicable to the decisions from Services Australia. But we can confirm that.
Would you, as public servants not attending your first rodeo, what's the actual process for a person on the ground in Ceduna or Bundaberg or wherever to say, I want, say they want to be able to buy some second-hand goods rather than paying, the Soviet-style prices at the shop for something new when they know they can get it for half the price second-hand down the road?
Under CDC, participants had the ability to request a release of funds from their CDC account into their normal account. They would need to.
I understand the theory. I'm just interested in what the practice would be. Like, if you're at Whoop Whoop, what do you do? Do you? They'd
have to call up Services Australia. They would have to provide them reasons why they need the cash, and so they can say, I need this for this, provide evidence of that, and then the money could be transferred from their CDC account to their normal account, which they could then take out as cash.
And what's call contact time for Services Australia was running at about an hour or so over the last 10 years, so you'd be on the line.
I think they had a dedicated line for CDC participants. We would take that on notice on what that rate was.
Right, so someone at Services Australia picks up the phone and says, "Okay, John or Mary, why do you want to buy this second-hand?" So would it just be is that a decision that is being reviewed? Is what I'm asking.
Oh, okay. No, I would need to take that on notice from Services Australia.
I'm interested in the benefits that the report has referred to. The review has referred to in terms of people being able to take advantage of using their resources to buy something at a different place.
With regard to the cessation of the CDC, obviously all those people in those sites are now off, except for a handful that elected to stay on as volunteers. So that process saw engagement with Services Australia, also Services Australia calling out, working with them to take them off. That process included helping them with disbursements. So if their money was going out for paying utilities, they would help set those things up. So there was quite a detailed process of support set up for an individual basis. And obviously all those people that are off the card have full access to their welfare payments.
Yeah, no, I realise for the individual assessment that would be the case.
That's right.
And I am particularly interested in that idea of the freedom, the individual freedom that comes with being able to make decisions. And even if it is the freedom to choose to be on the card.
That's right.
Did you? And I'm sorry, I haven't read the report from cover to cover, but was there any data on that? I know these are just, hearsay bits of evidence. It's not sworn evidence from people making suggestions about, child abuse or whatever, or public drunkenness. It's not sworn evidence, but that still, was there any comments there on people willingly going back staying on the card, let's say?
Yes, Senator, there was some views from people that would say, I'd like to stay on the card, or I know family members I'd like them to stay on the card. So that was certainly some anecdote we'd had heard. And similar, as Ms Hope said in the opening statement and other testimony, the consultations on the future of income management, that still has approximately 30,000 participants on it across the country in some form. The idea of choice is absolutely paramount, and plenty of people saying that with that choice they would exercise the desire to stay on a form of income management because they do receive some benefit.
And Mr Perry, I think just to follow that up, it is a really important point which we do keep making, is that there are people who do find value in being on the card and would like to stay on the card and have the opportunity to continue. There are people who would like to come
freedom,
It's the choice.
Freedom to do so.
It's the choice. And as we discussed last time in our hearing, even those who would like to come off the card would still be looking at those auxiliary services around things like financial literacy and money management, and learning how to manage resources well is very important to people.
Yeah. I know, and it's, I choose to do a lot of things that it's the choice, and individual freedom is obviously something that Australians value. And if you choose to be on that card, it gives, as you said, a different agency to being imposed on you, and especially when you're locked out of market, lower value market propositions. That seems bizarre. But I want to go to the individual transactions that are made using the basics card or the smart card. And I'm not sure if you watch much TV but have you seen the ads for the ANZ? And they talk about a falcon coming, like monitoring decisions made by, if I'm an ANZ customer, then all of a sudden I'm, doing something atypical. I assume it triggers some algorithms or something, or a large falcon, if I've misunderstood the ad. But so can individual transactions be reviewed or monitored by INDU or the department, and are they? How would that occur, and how would the information then be matched up to an individual person?
So I can't talk for the existing smart card because we don't have that contract, or we no longer have a client relationship with INDU. Under the CDC, INDU did do fraud detection, which would be that Falcon. So that would be where... So that, for example, if I notice that there is an overseas transaction on my account, they would be able to stop that transaction.
And is that an algorithm that suddenly...
Yeah,
or is it an interaction, or is it a,
You're going to knowledge I don't have on that. I imagine what they do is do a search in relation to my normal sales. So, for example, if all I'm purchasing is petrol and food with my card, and then all of a sudden I have this quite random purchase from Sydney, they might go, that seems out of place. In relation to our transaction data,
get back to me on what eyeballs were involved.
Yep.
Were they notified, or were they scanning, or in terms of the actual process for notification?
Yep, we'll have to confirm that with Services Australia, as they have that relationship with INDU now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'd be interested to see what triggered it. Okay, and in terms of the Deputy Chair that was asking some questions, basically tantamount to an investigation about child abuse. Do you remember that from the Deputy Chair's questions?
Yes.
So what state was that in? Do you remember?
It was I think a report from Sagina, Deputy Chair. Yep.
Sagina in South Australia.
Yep.
I guess you guys don't know if there's compulsory child like there is child abuse notification in South Australia like there is in Northern Territory. I guess.
I would have to know. It's not my area of expertise. Yeah.
No, that's all right. You've got enough constitutional powers to worry about without going looking for new ones. That might do me, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll hand over to Ms Tink.
Thank you, Chair. And just adding my thanks to Department representatives today in terms of taking us through your testimony and the report. I actually want to come back to the report because I'm trying to get a real sense of, in terms of the weight of evidence that we've already heard to date, how much weight this particular document should carry. I note that in your testimony, you've been at pains to make clear that this is a review, not an evaluation. Can you just expand on that distinction for me, please?
Yes. Will you talk to that, Mr.
Yep,
Bonham? Mr. Bonham's going to talk to that. Thank you. I can't see you, but Mr. Bonham's going to talk to that.
So, an evaluation is a much more and it's stated on page 19 of the report why it's not an evaluation. I'll just read it out to you. It says, an evaluation would require one to estimate counterfactuals, that is, what impacts and outcomes would have been experienced by the people had they remained on the CDC program. This information cannot be obtained from those who exited the program, since one cannot be both a participant and non-participant. So it requires, it's not just a review which looks at or requests findings from participants or stakeholders, which this has done. It tries to do an analysis of what the impact could be between a person who was on the program and off the program. And as they say in the report, this was not available due to the compulsory nature of the CDC program. So they basically then go on to say that, that the formal valuation is much stronger and costs are higher. So it is a much more in-depth look in relation to program and outcomes from programs.
Thank you. I mean, I pick up on, I think it was Senator Shoebridge who raised the issue earlier that, you know, someone who's new to this parliamentary process, this program of compulsory income management appeared to be introduced to bring about societal change. And so my next question is, so have there been, to your knowledge, are there appropriate evaluations that have been done around compulsory income management previously? And beyond that, moving forward, what reviews or evaluations relating to compulsory income management are now going to be put into place?
So there's 2 evaluations done on the CDC program. Both of them are on our website, and both of them had mixed reviews or mixed outcomes in relation to the outcomes from the program. That is pretty similar to what we're finding with this report, which is that it's very difficult to find causal relationships between what a program does, because it's very hard to disaggregate that from other impacts in society which could have similar sort of outcomes. So, for example, on crime data, if there was found to be a reduction in crime, but at the same time the relevant state government had increased police presence in that place, it's very hard to find that outcome. Same with education. There could be different rules in relation, different ways or policies of a state government affecting education outcomes. So it's very hard to disaggregate that outcome. In relation to what we're currently doing now, the consultations which we're doing will be part of an evaluation for us in relation to what we're hearing from people on the ground in relation to whether they want to be on the program and what they think of that program.
So just to expand on Mr Bonneman's testimony there, so as Ms Hope mentioned, over 4,000 participants have been spoken to so far on the future of income management. So this is the consultation to inform moving from a compulsory to voluntary model. So that will be the most current and contemporary data that helps inform. But in parallel, we are doing we're prepping for an evaluation of the support services. That'll look at not only the efficacy of those initiatives that we're putting in place, but also the approach, and we've trialled a few innovative approach there where we've used the notion of brokerage, where we partner with a remote key resource organisation to have a flexible pool of funding they deploy based on community priorities. We'll have to go through our usual due diligence and checks and balances to make sure it's lawful and appropriate and meets our guidelines. But so we'll make sure the evaluation of those support services include an assessment of that approach in terms of how our community priorities addressed moving forward, with or without income management.
And what's the timeline on that piece of work that you just mentioned, the 4,000 people being interviewed in the formal evaluation?
That continues. We anticipate to be able to wrap that up towards the end of this year to provide advice to government. As mentioned, there's around 30,000 people nationally on some form of income management. We've focused most of the consultation to date on the Northern Territory because that's where the large part of the longest running version of the program, the original income management that's been in place since 2007. And the next phase will look at other sites, including some other areas in the Northern Territory. We've been asked to revisit some of those places to have further conversations. People are very interested in what transition looks like, what transitional supports look like for people, given that some folk have been on income management for a very long time, and also what's a voluntary model look like for them as well.
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting. I mean, I guess it's worth noting in the context there then that the University of Adelaide report, which has taken a lot of our time today at the hearing, actually, am I right in understanding those results are based on 135 interviews?
That's correct.
So 135 amongst a population of 30,000 is a fairly small percentage, yes?
Just to be clear, that relates to the CDC, which had around 12,500 participants.
12,500.
So the consultation.
Still a fairly small.
Yeah. That's right. I just want to be clear on the denominator at play there. Yep.
Yeah, which helps me again with that question of how much weight does the results of that study, should it carry through this conversation? And just, I think, being really clear, making that distinction between it's a review, it's a review of quite a small number of people, actually, when you put it in that context. The other thing I just wanted to pull out is I noted, for me, what was particularly interesting was that there seemed to be quite a clear deviation in the feedback you were getting from those people who had actually been past participants of the CDC versus those people who had been identified as stakeholders around the program. So I think in the report from Adelaide Uni, it says that, you know, the majority of CDC participants believed that the ending of the program was a positive step versus a minority of stakeholders. I did note, though, that you said that minority of stakeholders, so when you were defining, when the university, was defining the minority of stakeholders, they went as far to identify for the reader that it's actually those services based in Bundaberg and Hervey Bay. I'm hoping you can answer this for me. Would those communities be covered by the Family Responsibilities Commission in Queensland?
No, not Bundaberg and Hervey Bay, no.
Okay. So do you know whether it was looked at all in terms of why there seemed to have been a more favourable result when it came to those Queensland communities from a stakeholder perspective than in the other communities that research had been gathered?
Look, not precisely. It is a larger population base there at Bundaberg and Hervey Bay, and I would think that there is a greater level of mainstream supports in that place, but that's really a guesstimate rather than a proper examination of that.
Is there any way that I could request that somebody just seek some information? Because the reason I ask the question is I am keen to understand whether a big part of this is about the wraparound services that exist within the context of any income management program. And it did just strike me that it seemed quite notable that it was the Queensland community stakeholders that seemed to believe that it had been a better outcome to have removed people from CDC than those in other states.
Yeah, we can have a look at that. Yep.
Thank you. And that's me, Chair.
Thank you. Senator O'Sullivan.
Thank you. Thank you for your time, everyone. Can I ask, in the report, it references the Domino data. Firstly, can the committee just explain to us what Domino is? And then my next part of the question is the review states that the review team were not able to access unit-level data and were provided with aggregate-level data only. And it says that under previous reviews, the University of Adelaide were provided with the unit level of data. So firstly, what is Domino data and why was there a difference in the approach this time?
Okay,
Thanks, Senator.
On the unit level data, Senator, I'll take that on notice on what was the difference between the two evaluations. And Domino, my understanding of the Domino is that it's a data set in relation to payments and the type of the payments received, broken down by various categories. So if you would look on page 4, this is analysis of Domino data indicated that requests for Centrelink urgent payments. So I can also clarify that for you if you wish as well.
Thank you. Are you able to, since July 3rd, I think it was, our last hearing, you weren't able to provide us with details of the consultations that are underway, specific sort of data. Have you got any update on any of that now? Are you in any position to provide us with any advice on the outcomes of the review and the consultations from ETM perspectives?
The current consultation processes we're doing, Senator, we have information on.
But in terms of the outcomes of those consultations, we're still doing like thematic type summary of it. I've talked a little bit to some of those findings, and again, stop me if it feels I'm repeating, but the notion of choice, I guess there's plenty of people we've spoken to that would, if given that choice, would stay on a form of income management. Plenty would say, I'd like to come off and I want to make calls on my own determination about what I should be doing. Certainly views that government shouldn't necessarily be deciding whether I go on this, but I wouldn't mind being able to choose for myself. I see benefits, so there was a range of views in that space. A real critical view that I guess financial literacy, capability and incentives are a really important demand area for supports, not only ongoing but particularly if in the move to a voluntary model people are coming off need a great deal of support in how to do that. And it's probably different from the CDC experience, just given the amount of time people have been on income management, as you'd know, since 2007. So over half the participants have been on income management in some form for over 10 years. So there's a long, I guess, a long period of time people have been used to and learnt to operate in a certain way in the interaction with the welfare system. This has to be done. I guess the calls from all members has been really consistent about a real careful transition as we move to a voluntary model.
Just to be clear.
Sorry, yep.
The consultations are not occurring in any of the CDC sites, so are they? So it's only in the...
we have visited, I think, a couple of the CDC sites. East Kimberley have been included, and we're continuing to engage in those.
But is that in...
Sorry,
and with the... Sorry to cut you off, but in relation to the East Kimberley, are you engaging with CDC participants that, you know, we're on the CDC because of being in that area versus, like, why would you be engaging in that community now, given it's ceased there and you've only got voluntary people, or is there still a cohort that are on compulsory income management in the East Kimberley?
I don't believe there's anyone on compulsory income management. If they are, they'd probably be coming over from the Northern Territory, who are still eligible for income management. The reason for consulting on the future of income management is that people in that region would have an interest in what perhaps a voluntary model would look like. They have volunteers in the former CDC regions that did elect to stay on enhanced income management, and so we are interested in knowing what the preferred role in income management, in a broader sense, also about how does that align with other priorities, be it employment, economic self-determination, and the like. So that's the nature of our consultations with those communities at present.
Do you have available information on, in relation to the ETM perspective consultations, what percentage of the participants are on the enhanced income management versus the basics card?
I'll have to check.
We need to confirm that, but I mean, I was on a number of these consultations, and we mainly focused in on the concept of income management. Some people did show me their card to say that they moved, and we did have brochures of all three cards, so the basics card, and the smart card, and the TCU card, and people sometimes would point to what card they were on. I'm not sure whether we took actual records of what that was. I'd be surprised, but yeah, there were people who said they were on the smart card as opposed to the basics card.
Right. What's the total number of people that are on enhanced income management versus basics card across the territory?
Moment across well, totally, I need to check on the territory, but at the moment there's around 16,000 on enhanced income management.
Yep.
And around 15,300 on income management.
So 15,300 on essentially the basic card?
Yes.
And then 16,000
on smart cards.
Yep.
Okay. And so was there any difference in the responses? Is there any noticeable difference between someone that's on the enhanced income management, noting that enhanced income, the card's a newer technology, it's more universally accepted, basics cards limited where you can use it. So a lot of those issues that people feel about agency and control were somewhat exasperated, maybe if given the limitations of the basics card as opposed to the enhanced income management. Have you noticed any difference in the responses?
Once again, we need to have a look at the thematic report, but just on the sessions which I attended, a lot of people who said they would stay on the card actually preferred the basics card because they were used to it. And they said, yeah, stay.
How many participants were on the CDC at the time of the transition?
Get precise for you, Senator, but it would have been the order of around 16,000, including those in the Northern Territory that moved back onto income management.
Yeah.
So it's pretty much a 12.5 in the four regions.
So 12.5 across the four, that was my
That's
question.
right, yeah. About 100 at the Cape York and then another
Yeah.
4,000 in the Northern Territory.
And how many moved, remained on it as a volunteer?
I think at the time of 6 March, it was somewhere around 140, 150.
Across all sites? Not a lot, is it? By comparison, you'd have to say. So when you talk about choice, I mean, it's clear that people are choosing to not stay on it. Is that right? I mean, the numbers speak for itself. So what's it costing then to keep people on voluntary income management across those CDC sites, former CDC sites?
Would have to seek some advice from Services Australia on that because they hold the main service delivery and also the contracts for the operation of both income management and enhanced income management. Quite a problematic number to come up with at times when it's at certain stages of early intervention, early startup costs plus ongoing, but we'll have to take that on notice.
Are you aware if there is any difference in the unit cost or the participant cost of someone in a former CDC site compared to those that are on enhanced income management in the territory?
Not aware of that, no.
Okay.
But
if you can come back to us, that'll be good. Has the minister visited any of the cashless debit card communities?
Yes.
Yeah. Can we get some times and dates?
Okay.
And locations as well.
And locations. Yep. Excuse my speed of navigating. So, look, I'll give a sample, but this, because I think this will be best taken on notice in terms of getting the detail, but started with Far West Community Partnership Group in 23rd of June 2022. Then it's got Desco Aboriginal Corporation, 23rd of June, Oak Valley, Yalata, Sejuna Aboriginal Corporation, a range of stakeholders in Sejuna proper. So there was a visit block on the 23rd and 24th of June. Then similarly up to Kununurra.
So they're all in Sejuna, aren't they? Or in that region?
In that general region,
Senator.
yeah, that's right. And there was some. I think there was some ceremony meaning that we couldn't be on site in the outer communities, and those members were able to come and meet the minister in place.
Yeah.
Likewise, Kununurra was in the 30th of June. Again, a range of meetings in Kununurra proper and also over the Wyndham with community leadership as well as service agencies and partners. Minister also in the, that was through the 30th of June through the 1st of July, so that 2-day period there.
And the year we're talking about there is 22, is it?
Beg your pardon?
22.
2022, sorry, yeah, that's right. And then up to Cape York, Family Responsibility Commission, including the Doomadgee Commissioners who visited on the 12th of August, and then meeting with Cape York Partnership in Cairns as well. Then the Minister also met a range of stakeholders from the 17th of August 2022 in Alice Springs and 18th of August up in Darwin.
That's not a CDC site.
CDC. Oh, sorry. Well, it is insofar as that there was representatives on CDC in those in the Northern Territory. So it was in particular around the abolition of the CDC was the purpose of those discussions.
Okay.
And
last one or two.
Sorry,
in
around 4,000 people.
What about the goldfields?
Goldfields, I think Assistant Minister Elliott attended Goldfields. Yes, on the 15th of August. met stakeholders in Kalgoorlie and
So last-
then Leonora.
What year?
In 2022, my apologies, yep,
Yeah.
in 2022. And also, Minister Elliott also travelled. I attended with the Minister to Assistant Minister to Arakoon, and we sat on conferencing with the Family Responsibility Commission, and also Assistant Minister met with Harvey Bay and Bundaberg stakeholders as well. I can provide the full list.
Thank you.
If that's helpful.
Are you aware of the? Appreciate I've got to pass the call. So, are you aware of whether the Minister has plans to visit these communities again to see firsthand the changes in the community? I myself have been to a number of them. I've been to those communities before the cashless debit card, so in the beginning of last decade. Saw it when cashless debit card was in place, and then have the benefit of now seeing it, or the not so benefit of seeing it after the cashless debit card has been abolished. And then there is a marked difference before, during and after. Has the Minister made plans to go back to these communities to see firsthand the impact of the cashless debit card and the decision of this government?
I'm not aware of plans at present for the Minister's travel. We certainly continue to engage. Again, I was in East Kimberley a week ago and had 3 years working up there prior to and during the card being in place.
Secretary was there.
Secretary was in the Goldfields recently, and we've got staff at Goldfields again this week and with Sejuna. So we do care deeply about observing what's going on, also working with some planning about service requirements in those communities, as I testified previously.
Yeah, because having seen and got the anecdotes of people and feedback from people on the ground, this report just basically covers certainly what I'm experiencing on the ground. So when you talk about the weight of evidence, I mean, it certainly accords with what we're seeing and what we're hearing. I think it's really important that the Minister gets there and sees it for themselves as soon as possible.
Thanks, Senator O'Sullivan. I'm just going to ask a couple of the questions that may need to be taken on notice, and then I'll give the Deputy Chair, if there's time, one last crack. What do we have the average length of time that people are on the compulsory income management?
I think we may have answered that, Chair, in the last questions on notice. I think the average time's around just about 3¼ years.
3¼ years. And what's the longest period of time that someone's been continuously subject to?
The longest time someone's been on it, I'll just find it. So it's actually 1,180 days is the average time. And sorry, Chair?
Is that aggregated for Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people?
It's all participants.
It's all
Chair.
participants. Yeah.
You have that data that would.
I'd have to take that on notice and see if we got that breakdown.
If you could, that would be really useful. Thank you.
And
is it possible to also do that via state and territory as well? The average length of time.
We can certainly try and get that for you, Chair.
Yep. Noting that I am right, so the Northern Territory will be the largest proportion there, and there might be some really small locations where we might get into we can't reveal, but we'll qualify all that as we provide it.
And
that'd be useful. Thank you.
In relation to length of time, there's been less than 5 individuals who've been subject to compulsory income management since 2008.
Okay. So if someone has been put on the compulsory income management without an individual assessment of their circumstance, is there any way in which someone can seek a review for that?
We'll take that on notice again, Mr. Chair, because I will need to confirm that with Services Australia on what their approaches are to review processes.
Okay. Okay. last ones from me. Are individual transactions by the Basics card or the Smart card able to be reviewed or monitored by Indu or the department?
It sort of gets to Mr. Herritt's questions. Indu does check transactions in relation to fraudulent activity. They would have the capacity to look at transaction data. In relation to what we would see as a department, we look at a set of anonymised data. So we are looking not necessarily at individual transactions, we are looking more at global transactions. So, for example, we will have data on the type of shops people are purchasing, but that's for the entire set of participants. So we might have 35% of sales are made in supermarkets, but we don't look at it from an individual point of view.
So you're not using it as a monitoring of an individual's compliance or anything like that. It's to give the department information about how the money is being spent.
That is the data which I see, yes, which I had seen.
Okay, I'll go back to the Deputy Chair if you want to have another go.
Chair, with your indulgence, could I just ask for one question to be taken on notice, if possible?
Sure, Senator Shoebridge.
Just on page 11 of the CDC report, it's got a list of stakeholder organisations by type. Would it be possible for the department to seek a list of those organisations? And I'm particularly interested in First Nations controlled organisations and get a sense of what their opinion, what their position on the CDC was by stakeholder.
Happy to take that on notice for you, Senator Shoebridge, and investigate that with University of Adelaide.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
No problem. Chair, yeah.
There was discussion before. Mrs. Hope mentioned the importance of choice. The review found that many CDC participants were unaware that there was an option for people to continue voluntarily with income management. Does that not demonstrate that people are not being given that choice? And what's the department doing to ensure that more people are aware that they can make that choice?
Do you want to talk about
Yeah, all people in relation to when they came off were advised that they could choose to volunteer for enhanced income management. Mm-hmm. And obviously some people may not have taken notice of that. Services Australia and ourselves will, when we are in sites, can make that statement that there is this available. The process itself to become a voluntary participant is basically you call up Services Australia. Services Australia will then check to see whether you live in one of the designated areas, which is a former CDC site, and then confirm that you are on a relevant payment, and then you can volunteer. So it's not a complicated process. It's generally fairly straightforward. However, as the statement says here, some people may not be aware of that.
Does it concern you that the report found that many weren't aware?
So the report. Sorry, Mr. Bonham. A couple of things to that, Deputy Chair. The report is now 12 months old, so we do know that. We have been talking with Services Australia frequently around making sure that there is information out in community. We are aware that they are not only actively using their service delivery network and remote service delivery network to promote that, but they've also have information now in multiple languages. As you know, in some of these communities there are multiple languages in terms of translation, and we also have stuff on the ground. So yes, I do take your point that at a point in time, as the saturation of that message may have not had the saturation we would expect, but we are working really closely with Services Australia to make sure that that is actually known amongst community.
Mm-hmm. One stakeholder noted that there's a lot of families out there who get pressure from their partner. They might want to go on it, but they can't. Another noted that there's probably male dominance again, which is hard. And I've been told that if you spoke to the women, they would be pro-card, but the men would be anti. What steps has the department taken to ensure that participants are not being coerced into leaving income management?
So we've had a range of conversations with community. As we said, and have given evidence about. When we do come to conversations with community, I think Ms Fouver gave evidence in our last hearing, particularly for future income management, but of course when we're in community we're talking about the whole gamut. We brought on, I think they are called EMTP, who specialise particularly in conversations around First Nations communities, which includes splitting up our community consultations to have men's business discussions and women's business conversations. That's really important to make sure that we have got good information flowing in lots of different ways to ensure that there isn't any coercion one way or another about issues like that and people do understand what is available for them. So we have had evidence in the past where we've had people say we don't want to come off it for coercive reasons, so we think it's protecting our money for our kids or for ourselves or whatnot. We've heard other evidence over those consultation processes where people want to come off and have that agency. So I take your point. In terms of some of those issues, we are aware of them, and we certainly take that into account when we are in community having those conversations.
And to add to that, during the consultations I attended, there wasn't a significant distinction between male or female statements in relation to wanting to stay on the program. So we will need to have a look at all that thematic approach that Mr Burford mentioned. But just from the consultations I was on, there were a lot of men who said they would stay on the program as well as women.
Mm-hmm. We're not seeing that in the numbers though, are we?
So which numbers? Sorry.
The numbers of people who are voluntarily staying on income management.
Yeah, this is a different site. Yeah, so this is the NT consultations.
I'll read you a comment made here by a Bundaberg Harvey Bay participant within the review report. He said, "For me, it was a godsend because I was able to pay my debts instead of just wasting money. It helps me save money, so it taught me a life lesson being on it. The government, not going to lie, the government, it's probably the best thing they brought out." Would you acknowledge that compulsorily restricting the spending of welfare payments can be beneficial to some of our most vulnerable Australians?
What I would say, Deputy Chair, is good financial literacy and tools to support empowerment to manage resources is very important for any individual. And I think that is very fair, and we've talked about that in this committee previously, that people need to have good financial literacy and they need to have good support skills, including resource management, debt management, financial management, prepay. All of those kinds of things are really important to people's self-agency and managing their resources.
The review found that the cessation of the CDC led to, quote, no positive impacts at a community level in any of the 4 regions. Do you accept that finding?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
The review found that the cessation of the CDC led to, quote, no positive impacts at a community level in any of the 4 regions. Is that a finding that you'd accept out of the review?
I think, as we've testified, the majority of participants feel their lives are better off as a result of being off the card now. I think that's an important bit of data as well. We do acknowledge the views of stakeholders and their perceptions of of what has happened since the cessation. But in terms of the removal of the card, it is important to privilege some of those views of the lived experience of participants that acknowledge that their lives are better off.
Would you acknowledge that the ending of compulsory income management has led to alcohol and gambling misuse, a decline in child wellbeing and welfare, and an increase in violence?
No, the data in the review did not reach that in any sense of or causal to that policy and those observed outcomes.
I note the purpose of the review was to develop an evidence base that may be used to inform future policy and program development. Has the report triggered any rethink from the department at all in relation to income management?
I think there's certain, and we've already testified this from our consultations as well, a lot of useful information about our approaches to communication, making sure people in transition are well informed of their options, including how to stay on as a voluntary member, We learn about the nature of support services, and as I mentioned, we'll do a further evaluation of the efficacy of those. These will be critical data points for us to provide advice to government about the moving to a voluntary income management model. Okay.
As will our information that we're garnering from community through our
Correct.
Consultation process, which, as we've said before, is the most comprehensive consultation process that's ever been done on income management.
Just a quick follow-up, if I can, Chair.
Last one, Senator.
Just before we close, in relation to the reviews or the evaluation that you're doing of the support services that are in place now, is that going to be an evaluation or a review under the definition that you were referring to earlier?
We're finalising the design elements of that at the moment, so I can't be certain in terms of my advice about the nature of that, because again, it'll be twofold. It'll look at the efficacy of the actual services, but also the approach, which is a bit of a unique approach as well. I think it would be more in line with a traditional evaluation, but again, that scope's to be finalised.
So why was the decision made to do a review and not an evaluation of the transition?
I think that statement which I read out earlier to Ms Tink is quite pertinent to this, in that the counterfactual in relation to a person being in a compulsory system, it's very hard to find the counterfactual of a person who was not on the program and compare that to the outcomes for a person who was on the program. So I think it was on page...
Yeah, no, I saw that.
Yeah.
That's fine, you don't need to go back.
Page 19.
Okay. Folks, we might wrap it up there because it's about to hit 3 o'clock on my clock. So thank you all for appearing before the committee today and for giving of your time today. The committee requested answers to questions taken on notice are provided to the committee secretariat by close of business 5 August 2024. Any further questions on notice will be provided to you as soon as possible. That concludes today's hearings. Thank you to all witnesses who appeared at the Hansard and Broadcasting for their assistance, and the committee now stands adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks.